Hi, everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion today on the topic of straight-through processing of financial documents. My name is Deepak. Dave, Sackett, John, Naseath, and Niyati are our panelists. I will moderate and anchor this session. Right. This will be a 60-minute session, 40 minutes of discussion, and a 20-minute Q&A at the end. Folks, please add your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen as we go along, and we will take those questions, post the discussion. So let me start by introducing our panelists. Dave Sackett is the VP of Finance for Persimmon Technologies. He is a fintech speaker and Forbes writer. He shares insights on AI, blockchain, and e-commerce. He's committed to lifelong learning and kindness. Dave also co-founded AI-One to boost e-commerce sales. Welcome, Dave. Nice to have you. Next is John Naseath. He's the CFO founder at Cantu Capital Incorporated. As a CFO and with a background in AI and machine learning innovations at Google, John excels in delivering solutions that address social and economic needs. Welcome, John, and great to have you. Last but not the least, Niyati, Chhaya, co-founder and VP of AI at Hyperbots, with more than 11 years of experience at Adobe, with over 40 patents and 50 publications, with a PhD in machine learning from the University of Maryland in the field of NLP and computer vision. Welcome, Niyati. Right. So, yeah, good morning to all of you, and hello, everyone in the audience. Straight-through processing of financial documents, I believe, requires several layers of accounting understanding and experience for accurate and efficient implementation. In today's session, we will delve into the types of financial documents across various business processes and how to achieve AI-driven straight-through processing and its benefits. We will organize our discussion in three sections. In the first section, we'll discuss different straight-through processing workflows across different financial documents and understand how it's done today, and the challenges that companies face in that space. In section 2, we will discuss the constraints on the straight-through processing of invoices and how AI can help. And in the third and the last section, we will discuss the tangible and intangible benefits of AI-driven STP and also touch upon the risks. We will close this session with time for questions and comments. As I already said, add your questions in the Q&A tab below. Right, so let's get started. My first question is to Dave. What does straight-through processing mean in F&A functions? Can you explain with an example, Dave?
Yes, in finance and accounting, straight-through processing is moving your financial documents. This could be AP invoices, AR invoices, AR dunning letters, so many financial documents to move through your system and your process with automation and to try to minimize human intervention.
Thanks, Dave. John, in your view, what are the primary challenges that you have seen in achieving straight-through processing of invoices?
Well, I first just want to acknowledge the almost imaginary objective that we're describing, which if you think like 10 years ago, this wasn't even a concept. And here we are talking about it in reality, and companies are achieving it. So from a simple perspective of what is the process and what would the constraints be, it'd be the same constraints that you'd have when trying to optimize your P2P process in any situation. In this example, though, we're talking about being able to make it so it's fully automated and everything just flows through. Some of the constraints could be the inconsistencies in the data, the different anomalies, the different formats that the documents are structured in, not to mention just the sheer volume of all of it. With so much volume going through, certainly technology can help with that more, but it can also be a challenge in how much you're going to be able to manage. And then every company's has different business processes. So Dave mentioned dunning letters. There's a lot of companies that do drop shipping now, and so they're not doing different pieces of what would otherwise provide additional detail to help you feel comfortable doing straight-through processing. And so evaluating where do you have the risk and what's going to be acceptable in an automated way as opposed to having someone stop and look at it, which is, I'll call it the current normal for almost all companies.
Thanks for that, John. Back to you, Dave. How do these translate to other financial documents, say in the case of expense processing or accounts receivable? What would be some of the challenges there?
Yeah, a lot of people have manual processes for expense reporting and for accounts receivable, and they've got human intervention. So a lot of people are bogged down with the volume of work in these areas, and especially expense reporting, where, looking at the policy of an expense report, did the person overspend? Did they have the right authority? Did they expense the right items? These are human judgments that are right to me for automation.
Thanks for that, Dave. John, are some of these things organization specific, you think? Does it make straight-through processing hard? Can you give an example? And how is it done today?
Well, throughout our careers, we've seen how it's become more and more automated, and different companies have provided more solutions for advanced automation. What we're talking about now is really the remaining pieces that do require a manual touch. And it's looking at those and saying what still is holding up the process and still requires a lot of coordination. Specific to individual companies, an example would be like the GL coding rules are unique to a company. When an invoice comes in, which account should it go to? The chart of accounts is different for most companies. Even though there are generally industry standards, it's still different to figure out how to apply, and that can be one of the harder things to automate. And then making sure that the invoice to GL mapping, if it needs to be broken down as different line items on the invoice go to different accounts, that's also something that currently most companies are doing manually through the process.
Understood. Yeah, as you said, GL coding and chart of accounts are organization specific. What are some of the key challenges across the board beyond, say, data and processes? Anything that sticks, you think?
Well, in general, a lot of companies still do PO processing or purchase requests manually, and that's not unique to the company. It's just I think there can be a more automated process, industry general for that. A lot of companies, I believe, haven't adopted or perhaps are reluctant to adopt PO and PR processing just because it's oftentimes not a SOX or it's not a compliance thing. It's not required necessarily. And yet it can really solve a lot of problems that otherwise are manual and just done through emails. But by having a real, call it industry standard approach that can be automated, that would be a lot of value.
Got it. That's insightful, John. Thanks for that. Back to you, Dave. Where do regulations and compliance play a role in such end-to-end processes?
Yeah, there's some companies are held to different standards in terms of compliance. An automated solution could make sure that you're not signing up to anything that's not against the company. So say, for example, purchase orders. If someone has to manually review purchase orders to make sure the company doesn't get into trouble from a compliance point of view, to me, that's ripe for automation. In terms of compliance, I guess when you have your automated solution, you would have a bot in your scenario where to be compliant, you have to make sure that bot follows cybersecurity, follows all the same principles that an employee would have, making sure they're restricted, they can't go to websites they're not designed to, and that the bot can't be compromised. So from a solutions-based compliance, yeah, you could answer that a couple different ways, but ideally you want to make sure that anything that's going to be processed through a manual process, you want to be able to automate that and make sure that you're still in compliance with your company's rules.
Great. Thanks, Dave. We have a poll coming up. Folks in the who are attending the session will have a poll you can respond to. But before that, does anybody in the panel want to add to what Dave said? Maybe Niyati or John before I move on.
I'm curious to see what the poll results are.
Okay. All right. So let me get that up in a second. Question here is, what are the key challenges for STP of documents? Right? And then the options you see here are volume of data, lack of standardization, non-standard formats and unstructured data, and all of the above. I'll keep this on for a bit.
I think it's just interesting, even the concept of straight-through processing. wasn't an option. And so just to say that it can be possible is remarkable. So
I'll give it a few more seconds since folks are probably pondering about these options and wondering how to respond. But yeah, I have almost 70% folks who have answered. All right. So, okay, I think we've got the results. I'll end the poll and display the results. And there you go. Are you able to see any comments from the panel?
I guess my comment would be there's no wrong answer in this one.
Okay.
Individual companies will have different challenges. Some people have, a huge volume of data that they can't manually process.
Right.
I had that issue in accounts payable, and I had an option to automate or hire another person, and I chose automation.
Thanks, folks, for responding to that poll. Great answers. And we'll move on from here. This takes us into the second section on constraints and the role of AI, right? And we have so far understood the current processes. What are the constraints when it comes to automation for STP? And where do you think AI can play a major role? John, do you want to take that up?
I want to acknowledge that just even looking at that poll, a memory popped into my head of early in my career. I was meeting in the office of the CFO that I was working for, and we looked out over this row of desks that had all the finance and accounting team in it, and we were talking about career mentoring. He was telling me like different things to do in my career and all these great opportunities that existed within finance. And he pointed at the gentleman who was doing accounts payable. He had a big stack of invoices on his desk, and he was literally just kind of taking one, entering it in, putting the next one. And his advice to me was, all of these are great roles. These are all great opportunities, but you don't want to do that role right there. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, it doesn't pay very well, and it's just painful. And anyways, that just stuck. It just popped out of my head from this discussion. And yeah, we're automating it. So I think one of the challenges of this is even finding resources that will do the work. A lot of times this is manual invoices, and depending on where you are, where I was in Silicon Valley, it was very hard to find people who would do the work. Even if I could find people to do the work, can I trust them to be accurate? And a lot of times the answer was no. They were inaccurate anyways. So I think that there's different processes you have. There's business rules you need them to follow. You'll build in constraints around how much what's the value of the invoice. You'll do higher value ones and make sure those are looked at and let the smaller ones go through. But with AI, you're able to build those standardized business rules in and not have to rely on potentially inaccurate people or even finding people who'd be willing to do the work when you get into the higher volumes. Then there's also vendor-specific challenges. The different invoices come in differently. Some will work with the vendor management platform, others won't. There's all sorts of challenges in this space.
Yeah, I think that's a good point in time for Niyati to sort of jump in with question to you is, can you share what AI can do to help here, and what could be some of the techniques that AI might
Sure. So all the problems that Dave and John have been talking about is where AI can help. But specifically, I think if I look at these problems as individual things to solve, a large problem is the ability to understand unstructured documents. So you want to understand, let's say, invoices or receipts or letters, and then convert that information in a way that it can be used for matching. You want to also ensure that every data point is secure. You also want to ensure that it's validated against any information that sits in the ERP. And then finally, you want to ensure that all organization-specific predictions or recommendations are correct. And all of this, when a machine does it, the challenge that humans typically have with volume and error that is creeping in because of fatigue, literally the fatigue of looking at invoices day in, day out, is what you will mitigate significantly, because the machine will rather learn from large volumes as against kind of bring in an error with large volumes. To respond to the second part of your question, which was around techniques. Techniques are a few things, right? So one is definitely in the age of generative AI and LLMs, those models help significantly, or the deep learning based models help significantly in the tasks of document understanding, doing matching, predictions, all of that. Then a lot of this is math or accounting data. So there are statistical machine learning and AI approaches that can help build models that are supervised or unsupervised, and which will help you do the recommendations and the predictions. And finally, all of this is something where we want to look at this data over time. So econometric models, statistical, other time series analysis, all of those techniques also come into play. These models and these techniques will only be useful when your data going in is clean enough and secure. So a lot of data processing is also involved in trying to build systems which are automated with inbuilt AI in the space.
Thanks for that, Niyati. Just going further, can you elaborate with an example of straight-through processing of invoices? What are the steps? What is the role of AI? And again, what are the techniques that you would use here?
Sure. Both Dave and John have mentioned about the key steps that are involved, especially when it comes to AP or invoices. But it sources at the point that usually there's an AP mailbox where vendors are sending invoices, vendors are sending queries, someone else is sending some other information. And the first job that the team member or AP clerk does is scans through that mailbox and picks the right emails to be processed to identify invoices and then take them all the way to payment. So that is where we can actually have an email classifier, which is a model that will be learned on historic data, which will automatically identify the emails and the documents from that mailbox saying, hey, these are the invoices, process them for AP. So you don't need a person to sit in there. Now, after that, again, it is humans sending these messages. So these documents may be anything. They may be contracts, they may be POs sometimes, they may be GRNs, they may be actual invoices with a cover page and stuff like that. So you still need a bot to go in and say, hello, in these documents, this particular page or these set of pages are invoices. So please only read them. So that's where you can actually have document type classification, which is again a supervised machine learning model coming into play. After that is actually the core of the problem, which is understanding these images, these PDFs, Excel sheets, or whatever from the invoice is coming in, and identifying vendor details, identifying the line items, identifying the amounts, payment terms, all of that. And that is where your generative AI-based models play a significant role. After that, you come in the AP related processes. So you have matching, you have validation against the ERP. You want to ensure the vendor is existing in the ERP. You want to ensure that if it's a PO driven invoice or a process, then the right PO is picked up, the invoiced quantities, the amounts and the line items match against a purchase order. In the case of three-way matching, they also match against your goods receipt or service receipt note. And this is where a whole fuzzy matching algorithm or a matching workflow is implemented, which is a combination of actually fairly complex logic combined with some AI. After that, before I can say, okay, hey, say straight through process, let's say all goes well to this point. I want to say straight through processing is when I am able, post matching, when I'm able to actually identify the GL code for each line item or for the invoice and do a post in the general ledger in your ERP. And that is where you have the company or the organization specific, say, GL code recommender, which will help you find the right code and put it in, and you do the actual post in the ERP. This recommender may be something that's built on business rules. It may be something that's based on the chart of accounts, or it may be something that is actually coded up as rules in the ERP. And AI has learned all of that. This is your kind of happy path, right? So end to end, invoice came into the mailbox and everything ended up into the GL happily. We may still come across examples where matching wasn't successful. So that is where you want AI to bring in the anomalies, highlight the exceptions, and enable the conversation with the vendor and things like that. So I pretty much see AI all through end to end in invoice processing to make it kind of STP success.
So moving on, we briefly talked about GL coding earlier, Niyati. Do you see this being automated with AI too? Or you think AI won't go that far?
Is it an easy model that maybe someone in college can build, and or if we query a LLM, it can answer our questions, just some commercial LLM? Probably not. So I talked about GL coding a little bit, and actually John mentioned the nuances around it in terms of the definition of a general ledger or a GL code is driven by how the chart of accounts and the business rule or processes set up by the organization. They will be different from one organization to the other. There is no industry standard there. There are some best practices, but it pretty much depends upon what kind of vendors do you have, what kind of chart of accounts is set up, what is the volume of your data, what is the frequency of your invoices, and all of that. So the GL code, while complex, is something buildable. It does need fairly state-of-the-art AI, or what can be known as auto ML pipelines, which is these machine learning models that can learn on their own frequently, and it also needs a routing logic, say, where in certain cases it's, hey, I don't need to use complex AI, I just need to pick up a rule and implement it. So it's a fairly sophisticated kind of a framework, but it's very much doable.
Okay, so thanks for that, Niyati. Maybe one last question on this. What about rules and business logic that is used for several of these processes? How will AI codify that?
I very at a high level said AI needs to understand rules. So on the technical side, it's about building agents. What does an agent mean? Agent means a specialized AI model which is trained and instructed to do only certain things. Let's say I have a business rule around certain vendors, or saying that, okay, the organization prefers vendors with only vendor payment terms are, let's say, net 30 or net 60s. Agreed upon payment terms are restricted to certain vendors. We can learn an agent to identify anomaly. And the job of that agent would be to just understand that, okay, the agreed upon payment terms for certain vendors is outside the net 30 and the next 60. So highlight it and maybe trigger a communication. So typically for business rules, which may not always be just data driven, is where you use what is known as the agent-like architecture, which pretty much codifies or programmatically codifies a rule in a if-else kind of a setup.
Understood. Thanks, Niyati. I think it's time for our next poll. Now that I've got a better understanding of AI in this space, I think we should move on to the next poll. So let me bring that up very quickly. Folks, if you can see this poll, please respond. You have a minute or less than a minute.
I'd throw out there or suggest that if don't default to all of the above.
That's true. Yeah.
College test, all of the above is usually the right answer, but I'd be curious to see what else might be the key ones.
I think I would rephrase the question to even say, where do you see the highest impact of AI?
Okay, I think looks like we have all the responses. I'm going to end the poll. It's a split kind of theory out there. So that's interesting. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing and we'll move on. Okay, we are in our last section, benefits of AI-driven STP or straight-through processing. So we will now move to a discussion where we want to outline the benefits. My next question is for Dave. Dave, how can implementing STP impact an organization's efficiency? I think that's an important one. And what are the tangible benefits? It would be great if you had some examples.
Yeah, so with my finance background, I'm going to give you my finance answer, and that's return on investment. So how is this software project, automation, going to really benefit financially the company? And a good measurement tool for that is looking at time saved. So in my example, I went through a process where I had so much volume of AP data, I had to make a choice. Do I hire a new AP clerk to manually hammer in all these additional invoices, or do I look to automation? And so at the time, we chose robotic process automation because it cost less than hiring an employee. It was more accurate, even finding discounts in AP that maybe the human discarded. And having all that being processed by a bot gave us a better business process where now we had access to a database that the bot had built and categorized all our AP invoices. So it's the benefits are financial, they're organizational, and yeah, and there's more.
Great. Thanks for that, Dave. John, next question is for you. What about the potential cost savings, could an organization observe by adopting AI-driven STP for invoice processing?
Well, as Dave mentioned, everything can be boiled back down to direct cost savings, man hours. I like doing Lean Six Sigma style mappings and quantifying it that way. I also want to touch, though, on the benefits to the people, because if you're wanting to do this change, I've had the painful experience of implementing a system and then the team kind of revolted and didn't want to use it and found ways to stick to their old process. It really comes down to, will your team adopt this new change? So some of the benefits of selling it to them is, this isn't about, oh, you're going to automate my job away and I'm going to lose my job. Like, that's a fear that people may have. And I usually position it the other way and saying, no, there's parts of your job that aren't very fun. There's parts of your job that you might as soon rather not do. And so we want to figure out ways to help automate the things where there's better use of time, better use of the resources that we have. And so as Dave mentioned, ROI, and you mentioned the cost side, I'm going to call out the other side. You can get a better return on the resources you have already, and you can help not only have them do more enjoyable work and then help them advance in their careers, but also do more strategic thinking and more value add things. I also want to call out, throughout the discussion, I've been hearing the term STP, and I just looked it up. In racing, there's a term around, there's this logo that you see all over the place, STP. And I just looked up what it means. It's scientifically treated petroleum. I'd never known that. And so I'd say this is scientifically treated processing. We are using AI science to treat our procure to pay, or maybe scientifically treated procure to pay, PP, I don't know. But anyways,
that's
there's
creative.
lots of benefits to automating. We've seen it throughout our careers. And this is just one more step of kind of picking up things that previously were impossible to automate, adding more return on the value for what we're doing.
Yeah, the very creative take on STP. Thanks for that, John. Niyati, moving on, in what ways can AI-driven STP contribute to improved data accuracy and the quality in financial processes?
And human errors, like I said earlier, is essentially coming in because there are people who are doing this and they're bound to make mistakes. And just because of the complexity of the task, because it's not only just manual task, it does involve understanding of the accounting space and the processes themselves. Also automated systems. So it's not that AI led rather modules or bots will not fail. However, they can be extremely coupled with automated systems that utilize the validation rules to ensure consistent data handling, which again, in turn, improves the reliability of the information that's being reported.
I'd like to ask John, how can STP benefit compliance and risk management efforts within an organization?
Compliance is usually a function of inconsistency. And so, a lot of times if you think about just accounting 101, they talk about a two-way match or a three-way match. In this example, it's really unlimited matching. I heard earlier in the discussion, you can tie it back to the ERP. You can basically look at all possible, even the emails, there's information there that we're filtering out and tying out. So being able to watch for inconsistencies and being able to, in an automated way, call them out for the reviewer to see is a way to avoid compliance and the benefits of compliance and risk management. It just provides transparency. If there's something that was off, it might catch things up. Or in accounting, companies love to point to your accounting teams as the ones that should catch fraud. But the whole point of fraud is that people are trying to trick you. They're intentionally making something not accurate. And by doing a unlimited match, if there's some anomaly in there, if there's something there, you're likely going to catch it. Just one quick example in that is I saw a situation where, it's the famous O, is that an O or a 0? And people kind of put things through and they're able to trick a human eye, but they can't trick the system. And so all sorts of unlimited matching is possible that can help prevent compliance, risk, fraud, all of the above.
Great. Okay. And what about the intangible benefits? Dave, do you want to?
Yeah, so some intangible benefits, and I'm going to follow up on what John said about someone getting an AI tool in accounts payable, where previously they were in charge of data entry. Maybe now their job is elevated and they're managing the bot and they're managing what the bot processes. So to me, that's higher value add that is now in your department. You've got an AI bot as a tool to help enhance what happens. And yeah, one example of another intangible benefit is just the categorization of accurate data, and having everything done through an algorithm or a rule gives consistency in where things are stored, how things are pushed, what things get coded to what accounts. It's because it's rule-based, there's far more data consistency in your data. So if you do need to retrieve it for auditing or any purpose, you should have a higher faith that the bot did it very consistently based on rules. So to me, that's some of the intangibles that go outside of the return on investment.
Thanks, Dave, for pointing that out. John, let's say we have AI that successfully does straight-through processing of invoices. Are there any adoption risks, you think?
Absolutely. I think that's true in any automated technology. Whether it's kind of the team not wanting to accept it because they feel there's risk to them, but let's just say that everyone's bought in and they want to use the system. There's risks in it's only as good as you've trained it, right? So I've seen situations where usually what I'll do when I'm introducing a new automation is I'll turn on the automation and then I'll still continue to run the manual process for a little while, whatever period you want, because there's usually whether they recognize it or not, there's some business rule that someone's doing manually and that wasn't built into the automated system. And so you'll have, at least for a period of time, typically I'll see some anomalies, and then you can recognize, oh, there was this business rule. And they're like, oh yeah, I have been doing that. I never told you. Okay, well, let's build that in too, and you're good. The benefit here is we're not hard coding anything. This is AI. It can learn quickly. And it speaks to transparency, it speaks to accuracy, privacy. But really the core thing is, do they trust the system, or is it something that you can just flip the switch and go?
So there is that need for a human
adoption
in the loop. Yeah. Right. Niyati, your views on this?
I think I love the example that John just mentioned. That there is a notion of completeness which may lack in the AI, right? Because there's always something in the head of the person who's doing it, and which the AI in the beginning may not know. But with time, it's going to get more efficient because it's just learning from the process and the data again and again. So I believe one of the key challenges beyond completeness and just understanding a fairly complex set of processes is the fact that it can be very easy for us to make black box or black magic kind of AI, right? Which is absolutely not transparent, just gulps in all the input, gives you some output without telling you why. So from a perspective of a technologist who builds such systems, it's extremely necessary to ensure the transparency in addition to your accuracy and efficiency, because the goal here is to see a significant productivity gain along with the people who are already there, without really replacing or threatening them.
Right. Yeah, a couple of more questions before we move into the Q&A section. So this one is for Dave. What would be your advice to the CFO community around adoption of AI-driven STP? Dave, your thoughts?
Yeah, so each company is different and has different challenges. So I would try to do business process mapping to map your current process to try to identify bottlenecks at your specific company. Wherever that process is being slowed down, and for whatever reason, kind of dig into it and see if automation there makes sense. In my case, I had two examples. I had our cash flow forecasting was painful and it wasn't quite accurate. So I looked into a bot to manage a cash flow forecast and also accounts payable. That was also a bottleneck where we had so much volume that it really couldn't be handled by the amount of staff on hand. And in my case, we went to automating those with robotic process automation at the time.
Great. Yeah, thanks. That's extremely practical, I would say. Well, I think we are end of our set of questions that we had in this section, and I would like to, turn to the attendees in case they have any questions. I'll open this up for any questions from the attendees.
Do they type them in the chat in the group thing there, or how would they?
Sure. You could type them in the chat or use the quick Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. Either way is just fine. I think easiest would be to just type it into the chat.
So in fact, I have a question while the audience figures it out. So my question is obviously to John and Dave. Like, if I were to look at companies who are very strict on PO-driven processes, PRPO-driven processes versus the ones that are not, where is it easier to do a straight-through processing?
Dave, I can take that one first if you want. I think it's really where you have kind of a fixed products. If you have kind of a BOM that you're always ordering from, then that would be more straightforward, and it's physical goods as an example. But anytime you have a services that's provided, or like some custom variations of things, you need to go back to that person who's managing that process and as the business owner and get their approval. Was the work performed? There's just extra steps in there. In theory, if you had AI doing it, those could be documented in a project plan. They could tie it out, and there's ways I'm sure there's ways AI could handle it also. But any inconsistencies, if it's not a set BOM or set product list, creates additional complexity.
We do have another question. Dave, in case,
Well, no, just to follow up on like where I think it's appropriate, three-way matching at a manufacturing company. John talked about the BOM being correct. Outside processes that are often a service related to something you're manufacturing, that's also difficult. But with the automation, it's going to be cross-functional. You'll have receivers, you'll have purchasing, you'll have finance and accounting. So to coordinate all that and have a bot manage what's happening and documenting it and having new processes to kind of map it all, confirm that who did the approval, was it done on time, are payments being done on time? There's so much that could go into a solution that wherever you're having trouble today, to kind of look to AI to automate and alert you, or to make an exception, help your business process faster and more efficiently.
Thanks for that, Dave and John, for taking that question.
Okay.
We have a couple of questions, yeah.
Both chat and the Q&A bot seem to have questions.
I'm going to go into the Q&A section. We have one question from Adam. What application is housing the AI ML, right? And how does it integrate with ERP like Workday or Financial Force?
I can take that and maybe have John or Dave answer that. Thanks for the question, Adam. So these kind of systems usually sit on top of the ERP. So they will plug into the ERP at one end and maybe the source of the data at the other. In some cases, the ERPs themselves have integrated modules to do some of the AI/ML. So there are both situations where you have organization or software products which are just doing this automation. So they are things that plug in or go hand in hand with an ERP which is already implemented, or a HRMS which is already implemented. So Workday being one. And you have the second kind, especially for large enterprise ERPs, they may have their own small module to do bits and pieces of the STP in place. But John, Dave, any examples you may want to add here?
Yeah, I can just go with a live example. We outsourced to UiPath, a bot, totally separate from our ERP. We had to make sure there was integration there through additional software, but it's a solution where we tried to pick around kind of like best of breed. We want some automation as on top of the ERP. So we could still have a separate vendor for the automation piece and still keep our ERP vendor and have the two communicate well, was my experience.
I want to go ahead and answer this one also. So I think it's all of the above to give that answer, because like if you look at what Intuit's just done a few months ago, they cut a lot of their employees, and they said, we're now hiring employees that are just going to focus on AI stuff. And that's QuickBooks as an example. But I want to give since I don't work for Hyperbots, I'll give a shout out to Hyperbots, because I think they're setting a trend that others are going to be doing, where yes, there's the ERP system, but we've seen lots of companies who are developing kind of like procure to pay type things that can connect into that. And the opportunity here is, how can you automate more of that procure to pay process? So in that case, it's built in, and yet it interfaces with the ERP. And the idea being that it's a simpler, easier process to work with, simpler for the end users to manage. We'll see more things that are built around the ERP, and I think we'll have some AI stuff in the ERPs themselves.
And thanks for the call out. So in fact, let me just jump on to the next question, which is where we are being asked a similar question, but specifically we are asked what systems can be integrated with these AI systems and what are the costs to incorporate that. So here, in fact, you can integrate everything, right? So you can have the email boxes, your drives, the HRMS, your existing ERPs, you can have the payment portals, vendor portals, all of that. And what is the cost? Typically, all of these well-established providers allow for API access. I mean, it does take some programming, but a complete finance AI solution will have connectors. So these connectors will actually plug into your the ecosystem of things. In some rare cases, when let's say ERP is completely closed source, there are still cases where some kind of secure file transfer protocol is used. So essentially, these AI systems will dump things in a certain file format, which can be very easily consumed by a ERP or some other system which is there. So actually the cost isn't significant. It is just plugging into the existing stuff with a connector framework through APIs. Deepak, that was the next question. So I just
right. Yeah, thanks for taking that up, Niyati. The next one is to do with challenges that companies face when trying to achieve consistency across formats due to the lack of standardized document templates. And what are these challenges, right? Yeah, Niyati, do you want to take a stab at it?
I can jump in, sure.
Go ahead, yeah.
It's really, I think anytime you're doing an automation, you have to think about change management. And it's almost easy to say, oh, well, here's the technology, here's the process, do it. But I think I've learned over time that the people part of the change is actually the hardest part of an implementation. And realistically, the pace of change, the next question is, how quickly can we do this? Well, the answer is, how quickly can we get the people who are going to be in those roles to adopt the change, to learn how to use the new system in a new way? We've talked about lots of other changes, but I spend a lot of my time focusing on how do we help the people change management part of it.
Yeah, I just want to jump in and just reinforce what John said. Absolutely, without a doubt, getting adoption, getting people squared away in any software kind of project, to me, is the #1 goal. For that to be successful, you need people to do their part. And if you have people rebelling against a new solution, it's not going to work. So it's really getting everyone on the same page, having it mapped out, having a project plan, executing it, having accountability, really managing that software project so that it can succeed through collective inputs around the company in some cases, which can often be difficult, but as long as you're making that your priority and you're giving it time, to me, that's the solution for making sure your software automation project succeeds.
I think we have one question, I think one of the last questions here, around the rough guess on the implementation cost for P2P automation. And is there ongoing license cost for AI engines?
I think I would want Dave and John to maybe share some ballpark numbers in terms of their experience. I can talk about a good strategy, but I think it may be good for both of you to talk from an experience perspective.
Right.
Okay, I can jump in first. I've seen 2 examples. One is that you pay a flat fee to get that automation, and then that software vendor goes away and it's up to you to manage it. I've seen other cases where you pay for use. Everything, like say if it's AP automation, every time the bot scans an invoice, maybe it's 5 cents or whatever that fee is. And then over time, based on your volume, that's how you're paying. So you're either paying an upfront fee for all the work to get your solution in place, or you're doing a solution where you're doing it as the bot gives you value, you're paying for that value over time. So those are 2 models I'm familiar with.
Yeah, I'd just say the key word you said at the end there was, Dave, was value. I worked at Google and I was on the Cloud Value Advisors team. And the whole point is, I'm sure the deals can be structured lots of different ways, but where you're getting value and you're saving time and you're getting all this benefit, whether it's a SaaS solution, or in this case, we're talking about procure to pay or finance automation, there's work they put into it. So they're going to want to get some value for the work, and you'll figure out the right exchange rate of, whether usually tying it to usage is also the right way, because it becomes challenging otherwise.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, John, for the response. I think we have one related to how does AI help address the challenges of data extraction and understanding across multiple formats, including scanned documents, emails, and other inputs?
Yeah, I can briefly take that one. And I think there's another one in chat around security. So maybe I'll start with a response to that as well. So the question here is how is AI going to understand the unstructured data? So typically these AI models start understanding unstructured data because they are trained on very, very, very large volume of similar data. And the goal of the model is of these systems is to convert them to a standardized structured format, which is then usable for other processes. So typically, including in the generative AI world, these models actually consume the form, whatever it may be, images or PDFs or scans, start inferring field by field. So let's say a supplier name, a supplier address, a supplier email, line item details, receiver information, all of that, and converts them into a structured format, which may be a dictionary or an Excel sheet and things like that, which is then further used for any kind of process, be it matching or prediction. And yeah, on the security related question, the question is, what are the major security concerns, especially given the sensitive financial data? And how do we ensure that these systems are compliant, especially given the regulations like a GDPR? Finally, what steps should be taken to safeguard against the AI model vulnerabilities that could lead to errors? So a lot of questions in there, but essentially, given its finance, it as a policy, when we train these models and deploy them, it is extremely necessary to ensure our PII and sensitive, rather, information is redacted or anonymized before it's used by these models. Second, no customer data is ever actually stored by these AI systems for retraining without these anonymization. And usually an explicit consent is taken from the customer saying, hey, it's okay to use my data for training post-anonymization or not. Also, given the sensitive nature of this data, especially because it goes back to reporting and pretty much talking about how that company is actually doing, because we have all the finance numbers, cross-customer data is never used or never exposed. So there are very well-defined boundaries in terms of how the data is stored, or as well as how these models train on, or rather learn from cross-customer or any customer's data. So essentially no cross-customer data is ever used. Some of these techniques allow you to reach GDPR compliance. There are a few more that need to be implemented, literally programmatically, to ensure that you are GDPR compliant. Mostly, those are around bringing in the right terms and conditions for use, especially for SaaS softwares, ensuring those terms and conditions are renewed, ensuring that the models are purged frequently, ensuring that certain data is purged frequently, even if the old data was very useful and things like that. And in fact, with the rate at which AI is growing, the definitions of safe AIs are also changing. So ensuring that these softwares have the updated regulations is critical. Anything you want to add, John or Dave?
Yeah, I just want to follow up when you mentioned before an AI being a black box system. So, and that's a risk that you don't want to adopt if you're going to go to AI. I think it's very important that there's a good audit trail of everything that AI does and why it does it that can be reviewed, that can be monitored, so that you've got an individual responsible for whatever AI does. So it comes down to having the authority over that bot. And if you're going to say, I'm going to rely on this for financial information, then the CFO, for example, must be able to sign off saying, yes, what the bot did, just like what an employee does, is correct.
Let me just throw in, I know we're at time, but we haven't at once in this discussion mentioned the word hallucinations.
Yeah.
And there's different techniques like RAG and different things that technologies will use. I think it's important to use a tool that is using AI in the right ways and using it for tying things together, not necessarily for computing an answer for you. There's tools that will do that in the right way, and there's ones that don't. So
Yeah, I think my advice there is to ensure that the tool that is being used has the right kind of validation, or it's tying back to that organization's business requirements. It is not this generic fancy AI which is going to solve all problems, because we want to solve these fairly critical end-to-end processes, right?
Great. Yeah, looks like we're on time, and I don't think we have any more questions. So this has been a very engaging discussion, folks, and thanks, Niyati, thanks, John, Dave. The opportunity and the potential for STP are extremely exciting. We just need to ensure that the systems are accurate and transparent, right? And they should have strong feedback loops for users to control their outcomes. And I guess once put together, this will be a win-win. And thanks again to all the panelists for joining in today. And thanks everyone in the audience for participating.